the West is to blame, processed food is to blame, pasta is to blame, and burger is to blame. Most Indians are not eating burgers and pastas, and they're still getting diabetes. Don't get your food advice from social media. The only food advice you should get from social media is recipes. It's a fantastic place for recipes. Oh, by the way, our product has no additives. Okay? It's 3 times more expensive because it will spoil sooner and make no effect to your health overall. I think it's just nonsensical, privileged, arrogant fear-mongering.
What are some of the biggest problems that are coming now because of the healthy habits that we have or our lifestyle that is coming in India?
Just eating more turmeric will fix this problem. And one superfood will fix this problem. Spices, people have to think about, they're fantastic in small amounts. Do not overdo them. The spices are plant poisons. So the weird hack here, this is something that comes from multiple doctors in Southeast Asia and Africa, is to use MSG. It's probably going to be the most controversial bit of advice on that.
When we look at the food industry, what frustrates you the most?
There is a tendency in India to look at the fact that we've had like 200 to 300 years of colonialism, right? And before that we had like, rule by people who invaded from, in Afghanistan and Uzbekistan and so on. There was this sort of broad sense that there's a sense of insecurity that we should retain our ancient traditions. And sometimes what I find is that that manifests itself in the social media world as people who are willing to believe very unscientific, dangerously unscientific things from the point of view of health and nutrition. Right? So because you want to blindly believe that what you did 2000 years ago is still relevant. And you're willing to believe people who will exploit that ancient tradition, Ayurveda and all of that, and make claims that really don't stand up in a modern practical kind of sense, because you have to see that the average Indian diet is lacking in protein, right? And we're one of the most protein malnourished large countries, on the planet. We have one of the largest numbers of people with type 2 diabetes, right? All of this means that you have to cut down on your diet, you have to change your diet, right? And yet, I think what is frustrating is that somehow people are not willing to blame their traditional ways of eating, and they take the easy route, right? And the easy route is the West is to blame, processed food is to blame, chips is to blame, pasta is to blame, and burger is to blame. Look, most Indians are not eating burgers and pastas, and they're still getting diabetes. Right? So it has nothing to do. For sure, this is not a defense of eating burgers and fries and so on. Obviously, they're bad. Unless you have an overall balanced diet. But I think unless we kind of break away from that sort of baggage of the past and say, look, this is a part of the world with a tremendous cultural heritage of 5,000 years, and there are things that you must keep from that. And the broader philosophical ideas of wellness, yes, absolutely yes, right? Rather than, you must not mix curd and this, you must not eat this and that. All that is just downright just bad advice in a country where we have so many sort of problems, right? But yeah, so that's often and people have an innate mistrust of any sort of scientific institutions, because we've not had them long enough, right? I mean, the country is like 1947, so we've not had institutions that have been around for 200-300 years. So people have that. So in many countries, people have a trust that when a famous university or a famous professor or a famous department or a scientific body says it, people trust those institutions. So, Europeans trust the European Food Safety Authority. Most Americans trust the FDA and those US institutions and so on. But we're in this unique social media era where it becomes easy to demonize institutions. And those institutions are not particularly good at doing social media. And the other thing is obviously that they've not been around long enough, right? And that too in a country like India. Those institutions often do not have enough resources to do all the things that they need to do, right? So they broadly rely on public and self-monitoring and things like that, right? They cannot possibly go and test every product. And so the blanket belief is that everything that comes out of a packet is dangerous. It's loaded with poisons, it's loaded with pesticides and so on. And that's just simply not true, right? I think it also prevents people from taking personal responsibility about what they eat and so on. So this is, this can get a little bit frustrating.
And I see what you mean. And so what you say is like there needs to be a balance. So you keep whatever it comes from tradition, but you are open to what science is telling you so that you can evolve. And not just go what is the easiest route. Right? In this, okay, so then people have all sorts of beliefs. And I'm not talking about myths, but beliefs. What are some of the beliefs that people have around food that might be harming more their health?
So a couple of very common kind of pervasive beliefs is, one is, I'll start slightly at the cooking process itself, right? There's a widespread belief that using shortcuts like microwave, pressure cooker, air fryers and all, they are bad for you. And so people will therefore say, no, only food that has been slowly and carefully and deliberately cooked very manually is good for you, right? Now, obviously, everybody likes fresh cooked, instantly made, slow cooked, elaborately done meal. But all of us don't have the privilege of doing that, right? So the first sort of big meta myth is that somehow you should not prioritize convenience, because it is my belief that if you prioritize convenience, you will eat healthier. An example is that if you cook a lot, put it in the refrigerator and eat it the next day. This is commonplace practice anywhere in the world, not in India. Many people will not eat yesterday's food because they think it's unhealthy. And so my point is, no, it's healthier than ordering out from a restaurant that will give you deep fried food that has 3 times more calories, right? And a lot more salt. So people will absolutely say a fresh food from a restaurant is healthier than yesterday's home cooked food from the refrigerator.
Oh, wow.
So it's a very pervasive belief, right? And again, it kind of, is also tied into a patriarchal belief system that, women will just cook fresh food for everyone, right? All the time, right? And as more and more women get to work, that's increasingly not going to be practical, right? So that's sort of one, right? I think a second myth, so therefore the fear of modern appliances and convenience, I think is a very common problem, because it prevents you from embracing convenience. So people will absolutely cook more fresh home-cooked food if they could do it in like 15 minutes, right? And so that's still better than trying to order restaurant food, right? It may not be as good as spending 2 hours doing it very elaborately, but the incremental benefit from that is very, very small, right?
Oh, I see.
So it's like saying that frozen vegetables are as good as fresh vegetables. People but still believe frozen vegetables are not good, right? And so on. So these kind of, this fear of appliances and modernity is one common thing. The second common is the fear of protein. So there's just so much fear and this thing around the fact that you must not eat too much protein, that it's somehow bad for you, right? And far more pervasive amongst Indian women. For some reason, there's this belief that if you eat too much protein, you'll put on muscle and things like that, right? And so there's a social pressure to suddenly not look very strong, and so on. So the per capita consumption of protein is like really, really poor, right? So this is and amongst the vegetarians, the myth that your dals are high in protein, and they're not. They're fine. They have plant protein. Just that is not enough, right? You do need, like, if you're vegetarian, you do need to eat yogurt because you get some animal protein, right? And again, Indian vegetarians don't consider eggs to be vegetarian, which is weird. Milk is vegetarian, but eggs are not. But again, that also deprives you of a very, very high quality source of, complete protein and so on. And then on top of that, the myth that all the newer convenient forms of protein like soy, soya chunks, etc. People have this belief that no, soya is very bad. It will reduce testosterone, and all of that is actually untrue, right? Or that it will increase the risk of breast cancer. All of it, it's the exact opposite, right? I mean, actually, it improves quality of life in women and so on. So I think these kind of myths about protein are and another problem, that they will not eat whey protein, right? Thinking, this is powder, it will cause kidney damage. All of that is like purely social media driven fears. And a very irresponsible mainstream media that increasingly in the digital world has no time to fact check anyone. They just want clicks, so they will report what an influencer says. They will blindly just report and say, oh, this influencer said whey protein is bad, so I'm just reporting it to you, right? And that reaches millions of more people, and this is pervasive belief, right? So I think so obviously I think the fear of appliances, the fear of protein, and I think the third sort of biggest underlying this thing is that you are finding easy single scapegoats, right? Oh, this additive, MSG, this particular processed food or this thing, rather than looking at the fact that your entire meal is imbalanced, right? That you're probably consuming too much fat, probably consuming too many carbs, right? And you're not getting enough exercise and you're not paying attention to that, right? And so on. I think these are sort of like the broader things. I think every time, I think you have the Indian, I think the National Institute of Nutrition, they put out a report that says this is what you should eat. And they always keep saying the right thing, saying that, look, your plate has to be 1/4 protein, 1/4, and so on. And yet people find it really, really difficult to take that and adapt it into their cultural ways of eating, because they believe that, oh, my cultural way of eating, I'm not changing. My thali is dal and roti and 4 carbohydrates, right? And then one dessert at the end and so on, but no protein inside.
But it is true that, I mean, also with social media, I mean, the amount of information, misinformation are there that creates those beliefs that in turn impact people's life. What would you like, is there any principles that you have or a framework that helps people to navigate rather than know this is right or wrong? What are some principles that people can apply that can help them to navigate the food decisions?
So first is that I think, a good starting point is what your grandmother ate, right? I think it's because one is that you will like the flavor profile, you'll be used to it, it'll be good for your gut bacteria, and it'll be sustainable for you, right? And it's not likely to harm you in any serious way. That's a starting point. Once you see that, you might want to then look at your overall health goals and find out whether, is it a right mix of carbohydrates, protein, and fat, and so on, right? And you might want to adjust that a little bit, right? I mean, if you're a meat eater, just add one extra piece of chicken or a fish or something, or an added egg, right? Or 2 eggs or something like that, to make some very small tweaks to get the sort of macros right. And the third thing is, don't get your food advice from social media. The only food advice you should get from social media is recipes. It's a fantastic place for recipes. Do not get health advice from social media, including from doctors. Because health advice from a doctor is best delivered one-on-one personally after a diagnosis. It's deeply personalized to you, and that's what doctors are good at, and that's what they're trained at, right? So when a doctor goes on social media, they have to be extraordinarily careful. They're not allowed to say certain things. They're not allowed to say things like, I don't think MSG is going to kill you. Because then some medical code of, they will be put under question that they put some patients at risk and so on, right? Although that's the truth, that a tiny amount of MSG is absolutely harmless, but doctors cannot say it. And because doctors are not saying it, influencers are saying it's bad, people then easily demonize it and so on. So, and the fact is that you cannot accurately convey health, nutrition, medical information in 90 seconds and 60 seconds. Right? So I'm saying this included, I mean, although my channel often exists to debunk some of these things, it would not need to exist to debunk that stuff if that stuff didn't exist and you didn't pay attention to it. I pay attention to it because some of those have like 20 million views. That's 20 million people who are getting the wrong advice, right? And so in that sense, I think, don't take that kind of health and this advice from social media, right? And I'm not saying people need to read and read academic papers and watch documentaries. Nobody has the time, so don't do that. But net, not watching social media is good for you, at least on this sort of information. On the realization that short form content is absolutely toxic for long-term knowledge. It's a dopamine rush where you think you're learning something, you're not learning anything. You're learning a headline, right? I mean, there's like 900 pages for one part of one organ that a doctor has to learn, right? And you think you can learn something about how protein damages your kidney from a 90-second reel. Right? So I think people have to recognize that.
It is really helpful. I think what you did, like those 3 principles. I think something that is today very. I mean, we all eat processed foods, and in the processed foods you have some additives, like preservatives, like flavor enhancers, and that. Are those things bad for our health?
Again, it requires perspective because like people think we started processing food, in the last 50 years. No, we've been processing food for the last like 8,000 years. Right?
Yeah.
So people forget that the wheat or the rice that comes from the plant is absolutely inedible. It has to go through tons of processing. It has to be washed and husked. Pesticides have to be sprayed. And people think, oh, no pesticides were used before 200 years ago. Absolutely not. People were using sulfur and arsenic and utterly dangerous things that they found, because no farmer wants to lose crops to pests. And this has been around for thousands of years, right? If anything, we now have synthetic pesticides that are more targeted, and you need to use less of them. So, right, and that's the people sort of forget that, right? And so, therefore, processing has always been around, right? So, it's always important for people to ask, what does the processing do, right? So, there's processing that removes things. So, you remove the husk, you remove the bran, etc., right? So, the more you remove, you want to ask, well, at what point am I starting to lose useful stuff? You can't eat the outer husk. We're not cows, right? The bran actually has a lot of good fats and vitamins and minerals and so on. So removing that, clearly you are losing something. But at the same time, most people cannot eat like the brown rice or the whole, with the bran wheat, because they won't be able to digest it, right? You won't be able to eat much. You can't bake very nice bread with it, right? So there is a balance between palatability and health as well. So this compromise has always existed, right? So if people really want to think about what is a truly healthy way of eating, you have to go before agriculture, right? Hunter-gatherers probably ate like very healthy, balanced, raw, unprocessed food, right? The moment we discovered agriculture, we've been eating processed food. We've been eating grains, which are processed, right? Now, as you then go down to it, you will reach a point where you are ultra-processing it, because you're removing everything except an ingredient that is not necessarily great for you. Like, for example, all-purpose flour, you've removed the fiber, you've removed everything. All you have is the starch and 10 to 11% protein, which is the gluten. And that's what you use to make almost all of your snacks. It has nothing other than calories, right? So in that sense, I think the people just have to pay attention to what the processing removes, right? And then make their choices, right? And so if you're eating, therefore if you're eating like white bread, once you have like a cheese and lettuce and sandwich and a piece of meat in between, that's not a bad meal at all, right? Because you're getting the calories from the starch, but you're also getting all the macros, right? But if your diet is just disproportionately high on just empty calories, like what's there in maida or all-purpose flour, then you have a problem. So now let's get to additives. Again, it's more a 20th century phenomenon, because again, we waste like a scary amount of food to all forms of oxidation and rotting and fungus and right. In a world where there's so much starvation, etc., etc. I mean, I think it's absolutely immoral to waste food, right? I think we use preservatives, we use these things because they extend the shelf life of food, right? So here's the interesting thing. In India, we have two ways in which we use wheat, right? Atta, which is to make chapatis, which is grind the whole, wheat seed. So you're retaining all the fiber, right? You make chapatis with it. And then there's maida, which is you first remove the bran and a germ and only the starch, and you get that whiter thing that we use to make bread and naans and all these other things, right? General idea is atta is healthy, maida is unhealthy, right? That's a simple way of looking at it. Atta has a very short shelf life. It will go bad in some weeks. Maida can last years. Likewise, unpolished rice will go rancid because the bran has oil in 2 to 3 weeks. Polished rice can last years. We have 1 billion plus people, right? You can't feed the population brown rice or only atta. You've got to have ways of storing the crops you grow so that rats and other things don't eat it in a form that lasts much longer. You would rather people not starve and get empty calories than starve. Of course, you still have to make sure that they're getting other nutrients from elsewhere. But I think the first problem you have to solve is starvation, right? Before you get to all of the finer stuff, right? So I think it's the same thing with additives, right? If you are buying a packaged food, and the reason packaged food exists, again, people think it's because evil corporations want to make money. Yes, of course, there's capitalism. Let's not, forget that. But there are people who work, cannot have time to cook, right? They work long hours. They just need to grab something. They just go to a shop, grab a tea, and the amount of the number of Indian people who do hard labor, who get a ton of their carbohydrate calories from just tea. They drink like 4 cups of tea a day.
Oh, wow.
Right? That milk and that sugar, that's why it's so sweet in India, because it's meant for that working class that actually need that carbohydrates, right? Not the person working in an IT company just exercising their fingers, going and drinking that sweet tea, right? So they often, processed food has existed for the last 200-300 years in packets and so on because of convenience, right? In the UK during the Industrial Revolution, men and women started working. So that's why you see British food is everything comes out of a can, because there was nobody to sit and cook at home. So canned beans, sausages, you go towards that sort of stuff, right? So you have to recognize that it plays a social role. If your diet is only ultra processed food, I can see why it's bad, right? But when it comes to additives, couple of things. Typically, the things that we use as additives are used in micrograms. They're not used in any meaningful amounts, right? The second thing is that the safe levels, the acceptable daily intake of those additives is usually 100 times more than what is normally added to a piece of food.
I see.
Right? So unless you're eating 20 packets of chips a day, you're not hitting the acceptable daily intake. That. At which point, the damage is from the potato and all the salt and not from the additive, right? So the second thing is, the acceptable daily intake itself is calculated as 100 to 1,000 times less than the amount that was shown to cause some damage in rats, not human beings, because you can't test these on human beings. That would be a human rights violation. So therefore, people have to remember that these are extraordinarily well-tested and safe substances, right? So in that sense, that scientists have been working for like 50, 60 years, constantly testing these. I would rather take their word that it is safe than some random influencer on the internet with absolutely no credentials or laboratory testing of any kind. So again, as I said, nobody is saying that you should eat these things that have these additives. Reduce them, right? But the focus should be on the fact that it's all the other things, right? So it's the fact that you're eating a potato chip that matters. Whether you ate it with additive or without additive did not make that a healthier potato chip. It's a potato chip. You might want to pay attention to that, right? So I think it, again, distorts the focus away from the real problem, which is that you're snacking. The additives just made sure when you opened that piece of snack, it did rot. What you don't want is food poisoning. That's why those additives exist, and that's why those kinds of, right, for sure, I think we can morally debate. There are certain category of additives that are meant to make it like hyper palatable. Right? So people lose control and they want to continuously eat and so on. Yeah, we can argue that I think the use of some of these MSG, the glutamates and some of these kind of flavors can make it more addictive, and some people cannot seem to stop and they continuously keep eating it. But even beyond all of that, for the most part, it is still foundationally you eating too much problem rather than it having an additive problem.
Right?
I see. So if you think somehow the world would be better if that chips did not have this antioxidant, all you have is more wastage. So the company is going to have to throw away any chips packet that's more than 3 months because it will go soggy. It will, because you didn't have a humectant that removed the water, right? It will become brown because you didn't add an antioxidant, right? Or that it will grow fungus because you didn't add something that is an antimicrobial additive and so on. So at some level, I think people have to look at it that way, right? Yeah, so there are some strictly optional things, like for example, food colors. I mean, you're using it because it looks attractive. It's we want a blue colored, so Skittles and those kinds of things. They're strictly optional. Again, the same logic applies. The amount used is so tiny that unless your kid is eating so much of that in a single day, you're never going to see a problem. Even then, the problem is from all the sugar and not from the additive itself.
Yeah, so what I like, and I think also that comes also from some social media, like big names that comes that, oh, this is toxic, this is not good. But what you're saying is that the amount of quantity that it's there, it's so small, right? That it's okay. The most important is the variety and the quantity of what you're eating.
Exactly.
But it says like if we just eat just ultra processed foods in high quantity, that's an extreme.
And I think whether you, right now, for example, there's companies then respond to the public fear of additives by introducing, oh, by the way, our product has no additives. Okay? It's 3 times more expensive because it will spoil sooner.
Oh.
And they need to vacuum seal it. They need to absolutely ensure that, because they're not adding any. A small additive would have made that product 3 times cheaper, last like 10 times longer, right? And make no effect to your health overall.
Yeah.
And yet, and the tiny number of people who are privileged are able to afford that. And they're making influencer content saying that, oh, you should eat without additives. I think it's just nonsensical, privileged, arrogant fear-mongering. Because the vast majority of people in India cannot afford to buy a product that's 3 times more than what the cheapest product is. So most of posturing on social media is you are looking at what the poor average Indian can afford and saying that's poison. I think that is actually silly because you're not looking at the real problem. The real problem is that a rich person often has the means to say, I will buy the version of the product that has no additives. And by the way, also has the means to hire a cook to say, I don't need to eat processed food. You cook 3 times fresh food for me, right? And those people are the ones saying that you must not eat anything out of a packet. You must say, oh, this packet of biscuit has so much sugar. Of course, we have a problem with people over consuming that. And India has gone from 50 years ago, problems being mostly starvation and famines to now being obesity in a very short amount of time, right? Because except in few of the northern states, starvation is not a thing anymore, right? Everybody's now the problem is people getting too many calories. This all happened in very short amount of time. Again, to sort of look at the analogy with the West, you had a 200-300 period from the Gutenberg to the Enlightenment to the Industrial Revolution to all of that to slowly address this and eventually bring your eating habits and all these other political views in line with the speed with which science was going, right? I mean, you can sort of see, I think, the first version of some of these carbonated beverages included some really wild ingredients. They had like lead and arsenic and cocaine and things like that, right? And then science said, maybe these are not good for you, right? And then we slowly, and that's the process, right? And especially when you do that in such a short amount of time, you're going to have these kind of problems.
Yeah, super nice. I like it. Yeah, I really like it. Like you mentioned about I mean, before there was more about starvation.
Yes.
Now there's other problems.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest problems that are coming now because of the healthy habits that we have or our lifestyle that is coming in India?
I think clearly, our diet is clearly requires a rethink. I think a lot of people in urban India are probably eating far more calories than they need, given the amount of physical activity they have.
Okay, yeah.
And it's not helped by the fact that the average Indian large city lacks open spaces and traffic, and it's very hard to say go out for a run, right? Right? So it lacks these kind of open public spaces, and again air quality, right? So all of these are like combinatorial factors, and there is also, so historically people would eat their dinners much earlier, right, around sunset, right? So the Ayurvedic idea that you must try and you have your last meal around sunset, which therefore then gives you 3-4 hours, right? Which we now know is good for you because it brings your insulin and glucose levels back to normal, which then improves the quality of your sleep. We now know it's sort of validated by science, but people don't do that anymore. People now sleep at like 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. That's like, and they have indoor lighting and they have smartphones, so their melatonin is all broken. So quality of sleep is also being affected. Especially in Indian cities, you can never get perfect silence because there's like construction going on 24/7, right? Something or the other.
Wow.
So there are these combinatorial series of factors, and of course, but people do not want to look at it holistically. They want to blame, one additive, one and so on, and in equal measure, think that there is one cure. Just eating more turmeric will fix this problem, and one superfood will fix this problem. Or ghee in the morning will fix the problem, and so on, right? But yeah, so it's a larger urban lifestyle sort of this thing, right? Again, and along with all of this, lack of sleep, that if you're eating, your percentage of processed food, ultra processed food is more, then you're not getting enough fiber, which means that your gut health is also starting to become a problem. right, and so on. And again, this is interesting because generally gut health is often sometimes helped when you live in a place that is not hyper hygienic, right? A lot of places in the West are just so ultra clean, which is why you sort of, the moment somebody comes from Europe to India, first week is generally bad. The local bugs, have to, figure out a way to colonize you, right? But now increasingly, as I said, people are buying more and more cleaning products. They are washing their hands, in a weird sense, right? Indian street food is the guy dipping the pani puri with his hand into that and giving it to you, right? Now he's wearing a glove. So slowly, increasingly, there is more. So it's a very weird, I find it, I don't want to be the reckless person who says that, no, you should let him go dip because it'll be good for your immunity. Because I don't want that. And you don't want food safety to be an issue. But it's a collective set of issues that are now kind of all working against general sort of good gut health, mental health, and sleep, and obviously diet, right? All four, and lack of physical activity, right? And so I think it's a combination of things that sort of make life in an Indian city particularly challenging right now, right? So I think those are, so I hope people don't want to look for solutions in like simple tricks and hacks from a 90-second Instagram reel.
It's really crazy now, the lifestyle that we are having and the impacts that are having in our health. Yeah, but coming back to food, in your book you mentioned about a couple of foods that are interestingly more healthy. They are healthier, like the lady fingers and the liquid. What are some of, even surprisingly, healthier foods that maybe people are not so aware?
I think so in general, people tend to, because of this obsession with superfoods, right?
Yeah.
And the obsession with superfoods is often sustained by the fact that when you make an Instagram reel, a 60-second video, you can really do justice to try and glorify one thing. You can't like speak about 5 things, right? So it's sustained that we have this belief that blueberries and avocados and kale, these are superfoods, right? Like broccoli, right? And so on, right? And what we've often found is that you take a vegetable, a very fancy vegetable that's really expensive, like an avocado, or you take a broccoli, right, in India. A difference between a broccoli and a cauliflower, nutritionally, is nearly nothing.
Okay.
A cauliflower is like a fraction of the cost, right? So Indians sometimes forget that you can just eat cauliflower. And by the way, I mean, you have many traditional dishes that already use it. Yeah. Just have your aloo gobi, I think you'll be fine, right? And I think likewise, things like, say, blueberries are very antioxidant rich. Well, amla has way more antioxidants than blueberry, right? So, and amla is like some of the cheapest things, you can find, right? And by the way, you can preserve them and ferment them and keep them for like years, right? So I think an interesting thing I've often found is that in general, it's easier for you to consider vegetables to be the healthiest things you can eat, if at all you want to simplify your life.
Yeah.
Any vegetable. Ideally, there's a ranking, I think, starchy root vegetables a little bit below.
Yeah.
Non-starchy vegetables are all good. It doesn't matter. And the more number of them, more diverse ones you eat, the better. Because then you get a benefit of everything.
Sorry, what kind of vegetables are there?
So your lady's finger is obviously one, right?
Yeah.
All forms of spinach, different kinds of leaves, ivy, all kinds of gourds, which again, all traditionally Indian, very high on water, but so very low calorie, high nutrient, right? And then, all the gourds, which includes all then you have the cucumbers and the pumpkins and all the rest of those kinds of things. But you also have some really good underground ones like yams and your sweet potatoes and so on, which are also good, right? In addition to, and people demonize potato. Actually, potato is really, really healthy, right? Just don't deep fry it and eat it with your burger, right? Potato is like rich in vitamin C, right? As a carbohydrate source. It's really, really good. It's high satiety, right? Like equivalent amount of rice. If you try and eat that much potato, you will feel really full, and that's a good thing, right? So it's actually good to eat potato as a starch and so on, right? So in general, don't overthink vegetables. They're all great. Carrots, you name it, right? Just go to a vegetable. pick different vegetables and have like a mixed vegetable dish regularly, and I think that's the most healthiest things you can eat. Little bit below that, I will put fruits, because only reason being fruits are also like super sweet nowadays, right? I mean, they've been bred to be super sweet, and even there I would say put something like a guava, which is not very sweet. I think the maximum nutrition in a fruit for the lowest price is a guava. It's insanely rich in so many vitamins and minerals, not packed with sugar, and really, really nice tasting. And by the way, the traditional way of eating it is to sprinkle chili powder and a little bit of salt, and it's absolutely delicious, right? So, if you're on a hot summer day, the salt and the other things is also an electrolyte in that sense, right? So, I think guavas, so the less sweeter fruits, right? So, then obviously you get to the more sinful fruits like mangoes and other things. But in general, fruits are amazing. So vegetables, fruits, right? Then are about health, right? And the other this thing is that protein. You really need to sort of look at various protein sources, which are about strength, right? And so on. So the point is that within each of these sources, you do not have to say, I will only eat Atlantic salmon. Okay. Literally, you can eat any fish from the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal, and you'll be fine. You get all the omega-3s, and it's really, really healthy, right? So I think the broad message is that don't think in terms of superfoods, and often you will find that the traditional vegetables that have been consumed for a long amount of time, the ones that are low calorie, that are high density in nutrients, are the best things you can eat, because they'll make you feel full, they'll give you fiber. And they're good for your gut bacteria. Like what? Like which one? Like literally any vegetable other than, including even potato, any vegetable is good for your gut bacteria, is generally low in calories, unlike the starchy ones. And they will make you feel full sooner. They give you a lot of the antioxidants and all the minerals and so on, right? So therefore, I think that's the easier way to think about superfood. Spices, people have to think about the fact that they're fantastic in small amounts. Do not overdo them. The spices are plant poisons, right? They're insecticides that are meant for a plant to protect itself from pests, right? In small amounts, they're fantastic for you. In large amounts, they will damage your liver. So don't drink turmeric in milk 3 times a day and all that stuff. No, it's meant to be eaten with your food. Don't go beyond that. Wow. Super interesting. Yes. Super interesting. You mentioned about our gut. You mentioned about gut. Also about the fermented foods. Yes. What is the role or the importance of fermented foods for our body? It is. See, I think it is. We're increasingly learning, like every year, that we live in a symbiotic relationship with trillions of bacteria, right? In fact, I think, there are as many bacterial cells as there are human cells in our body, right? So really questioning, are we human or are we a host for that bacteria that live there, right? Because they have absolutely the power to kill us anytime they choose to. It's a very delicate balance that we keep. They live in our gut. They're not allowed to get into our blood. They give us lots of very, very useful things, but they also generate chemicals that affect our mood, and there's a direct connection to the brain as well. So, I mean, the fact that we let bacteria in our gut have a direct connection to the brain says something about our evolution, that we've co-evolved with these things. We're not just humans, we belong with them, right? So I think it is only now that we're kind of recognizing that when we eat, it's about what you need and also what the gut bacteria need. And if you do not satisfy them, you encourage a different population of gut bacteria that are not good for you. And remember, this is not. It's not like one organ, right? It's millions of kinds of bacteria, and you want the right population, right? Everybody has different gut bacteria. Like, for example, when you travel to India, there's like a 10 to 15% change in the composition of your gut bacteria. That changeover is when you feel the digestive discomfort in the first days when you come to India. Likewise, when we go anywhere else, you feel the same thing, right? And then eventually your body adjusts to what it thinks is the right mix of bacteria and so on, right? Again, so the more soluble fiber you eat, and that goes back to my lady's finger point, that sticky mucus inside the lady's finger is soluble fiber. And it's just pure food for your gut bacteria. You don't digest it. You don't get anything from it, but it's for them.
Right? I see.
On the other hand, the actual hard fibrous exterior of any fruit, that's just insoluble fiber, that is not eaten by anyone. That just goes straight through.
Oh, I see.
That's just to make your life easier and nothing else. It's only soluble fiber that largely is consumed by these bacteria. They break it down and they ferment it.
Yeah.
Right. So fermentation is basically right. So there are two ways of thinking about it. Right. What our gut bacteria do by fermenting the food we eat and give us very, very useful things. Humans have figured out a way to do that outside by adding microbes directly to milk. So you get yogurt, you get right, you get all these kefir and all these other drinks and kombucha and things like that, or even vegetables in salt water will also lacto-ferment over time. So whatever benefits you're waiting, hopefully having your gut bacteria do in your gut, you're getting all those benefits outside, and then you consume that directly. So that's basically the goal of fermentation. Of course, the bigger goal is also to make beer and wine. That's a different thing. But the useful fermentation for our body is the lacto-fermentation, which is what we end up doing. And then obviously there are others like aspergillus and koji in some of these Southeast Asian cultures for fermenting what you make into soy sauce, or what you make into miso and natto and tempeh and things like that, right? So these microbes break the large molecules into smaller ones, make them more bioavailable. They unlock a lot of nutrients that you would otherwise not have, right? So with the South Indian snack called idli, right? So rice and urad dal ferment. It's the fermentation that unlocks a lot of the vitamin B and many of the amino acids and so on, that makes the idli more nutritious than just the rice and the dal separately because of the fermentation.
Oh, the process.
Yeah, it's that process because, so think of it as digestion that's happening outside of the body. And you've outsourced that to these microbes.
Yeah,
that's what fermentation.
And what are some of what is your advice in terms of how can we get more? What kind of fermented foods we can get? Give us some advice there.
So I think the most common fermented food Indians consume is yogurt, dahi.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So this technically, I think. Technically, there's a difference between the Indian dahi and yogurt because the bacterial cultures are slightly different. In fact, the one for yogurt has one lacto something bulgaricus, I think apparently originated in Bulgaria and so on. But otherwise, I think it's a family of lactobacteria that make your Indian dahi. It's been around for millennia because milk spoils very quickly. The only way to preserve milk is to ferment it with this bacteria. So it's sour, and sour things don't spoil, right? And that's why we have this culture. And homemade dahi is going to have those living bacteria. So that's an added advantage. You replenish the population of those living bacteria, right? Again, by the way, your stomach will kill most of them, but then few end up actually escaping and going in population.
Actually, you mentioned in your social, it's about 99%.
Mostly, yeah. Everything, yes. So that's
unbelievable.
That is why people hype probiotics, which is your fermented food, right?
Yeah.
If you ask doctors, it's prebiotics that's most important. Prebiotics is food for the guys who are there.
Yeah.
Probiotics become important at times when you have eaten too much processed food, you had a party, and you're in a bit of a mess, and your population of gut bacteria is not good, or you were sick and you had antibiotics, which by the way will also kill a lot of your gut bacteria, right? That's the problem with consuming antibiotics. They kill all bacteria, including the good ones in your gut, right? That's why you should not over-consume antibiotics or self-medicate and so on. So what happens is that at that time, eating a probiotic like yogurt, etc., will repopulate your gut bacteria. But for day-to-day normal it's eating prebiotics. Prebiotics are soluble fiber in vegetables and things like dals. Dals are among the best sort of foods because a lot of the so the reason you find discomfort when you eat beans or chickpeas is basically that particular resistant starch that you cannot eat, you cannot digest, is being eaten by the bacteria, is being fermented by the bacteria, and it generates carbon dioxide.
Oh.
Yeah. So some amount of that discomfort is actually good for you, right? So too much obviously is going to make you uncomfortable, but yeah, that's the whole point. And that means that you are actually feeding your gut bacteria, right? So therefore prebiotics, which is food for your existing gut bacteria, is probably the most important thing for most average people, right? So, but they overhype probiotic.
Exactly.
Then 99% it's gonna get destroyed by this thing. You get benefits of whatever they've already produced that you're going to absorb. That's good.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. But you should focus more on as much on prebiotics and not just the probiotics.
I see. And we should, I think that we need to focus on the foods that you just said that give us the prebiotics and the probiotics.
Fruits, vegetables, fruits and dals. These are in Indian diet, these are the ones that are best for your gut. Yeah.
Perfect. So we started, we understood the some of the myths and the beliefs. Then we understood the some of the different types of food, the impacts.
Yeah.
Now we came into fermentation.
Yes.
I think, your book, there's so many tips. I mean, I know you want people to be a better cook.
Yes.
And also to have more fun in the kitchen.
Then they'll cook more.
Exactly.
And cooking more means more home cooked food, and that's generally better health.
I love that. Yeah. Like, what would be, tell us 3 tips from your book regarding cooking that can help people to be a better cook and to have more fun?
Yeah. So one is, I think the most widely consumed protein in India has to be chicken, pretty much global now. And again, I think, and within that, I think chicken breast is probably pretty common, right? And a common problem is that, as you might have found in India, people do not like rare meats. They like it well done. So do not take Indians tend to overcook the chicken, and so that's why the chicken will be rubbery, right? Chicken breast particularly becomes really, really rubbery, right? So the problem is that you have to cook a chicken breast at like between 67 and 70 Celsius and not higher than that.
Oh, I see.
And most people just use very high heat. They use a tandoor, so it's really it's not going to be practical to do that, right? So the trick to making chicken that doesn't taste rubbery and hard is to soak it in 8% salt solution for an hour and then cook it. Then it will not lose the moisture because it has the salt inside, and so it will remain juicy.
So 8%.
So if you have a liter of water,
exactly,
80 grams of salt, right? Yeah, it's called brining.
Yeah,
and it's something that fine dining restaurants often use, and that's how you get a very juicy sort of a chicken breast, particularly. Right? Less of a problem with thigh or other cuts that are naturally juicier, but chicken breast, this is a very common hack, and Indians tend to overcook it, right? And so that is a very easy trick for you to sort of do that. You don't have to do sous vide and all that fancy stuff. You can just soak it in salt, right? And this is clearly one. The second sort of convenience hack is, this is like, obviously sometimes people get very upset, is that older people, right? If you have older people in your family, and sometimes you have the problem that they don't have much of an appetite, okay? And their doctor will often at that age will tell them that he has a heart problem, so you have to cut down on salt. And if you cut down on salt, Indians like really salty food and they lose their appetite, and this is very bland. They don't like eating that bland food. And as you grow age, you will lose weight, and this is a common problem, right? Indians like very salty food, and they end up having heart problems. And when they become older, the doctors will say cut down on the salt. And so the people at home will cook food with less salt, and they say, I'm not able to eat it at all. And so they eat less, and then they lose weight, right? And this is a problem for older people, right? So the weird hack here, this is something that comes from multiple doctors in Southeast Asia and Africa, is to use MSG. MSG because it has sodium. People forget that the saltiness in sodium chloride comes from the sodium, not the chloride, right? So MSG also has sodium, but it has a fraction compared to sodium chloride, with the added advantage of the glutamate encouraging the salivation. So you'll find food tastier. So you get them to eat more food, right? It's probably going to be the most controversial bit of advice on this thing, because there are like so many influencers demonizing MSG. Yeah. But again, as I said, this is a very specific situation. We're not talking about giving it to kids so that they eat a lot of chips. That's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But there is a time and place for making something that's more palatable. Old people not eating enough and they can't eat very salty food, MSG is a fantastic way to actually get them to eat more food, right? The third hack that's also sort of popular from my book is, again, not very common in India, right? Which is that a good way to get more flavor into your curries and gravies is when you do the usual thing of oil and saute the spices and the onion and ginger, garlic, right, as a base, right? Before you add your water or the tomato puree to make that base, a little bit of any kind of alcohol, like typically like a wine or typically even some of these harder alcohols like rum. Rum is ideal actually for Indian food.
Okay.
Just a little bit. Extracts a lot more flavor from the spices because alcohol is a fantastic solvent.
In which quantity?
So very small, right? And by the time you've cooked the food, all the alcohol is evaporated.
Oh,
but while that alcohol is there, it's going to dissolve more of the spices from those spices and disperse them into the dish before the alcohol itself evaporates, right? And so you get far richer flavors. And then the added advantage of something like a rum is that it adds that complex molasses, sugar caney sort of a little bit of that flavor, which works very well with the other spice flavors from a balance stuff. You don't need much, right? And again, if you're like religiously orthodox and you don't want to use alcohol, that's fine. But it's very small and mostly the alcohol burns off. And might I remind people that your bread dough has a fair amount of alcohol. What do you think yeast produces? It produces alcohol, right? But all the alcohol, when you bake a bread, the alcohol evaporates. So the final product has very little alcohol. Even your idli batter has a tiny amount of. Any fermentation will produce alcohol. That's the way nature works, right? Because yeast will produce. Right? And so I think this is a good way. So because hot oil is one of the best solvents for spice flavors. They're all fat soluble. Alcohol is again a fantastic solvent. Water is the worst solvent.
Oh.
So that's why when you add spice powders into a watery gravy, you're losing most of the aromas to the air. That's why Indians do tadka. They always get the spices into the oil. That's the whole idea, right? So.
And if because we are in India, and what about the best way to get the ideal taste of spice when you're cooking?
It is. See, I think it's very regional and cultural. Every region, every 100 kilometers, people have a different spice combination they use.
Yeah.
And a different choice of fat.
Yeah.
So it's the choice of fat and the spices that makes the flavor.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're in Kerala, it'll be like coconut oil and a bunch of spices, right? So I think fundamentally spice flavor layering it's got 3 layers to it, right? You start with oil and those initial spices.
Yeah.
80% of the flavor of your dish comes from that.
Oh. Okay.
That's the one that's the base, right? Then you add spice powders. That's sort of more like a perfume. That's more like the middle note. Because that's mostly aroma, right? It's not dissolving into right? And then the little bit of oil and the spices you add right at the end. The final tadka, that's like the top note of the perfume, right? That's there so that when the dish comes, they know exactly what it is. That smell will dissipate very quickly.
Oh.
You eventually taste the middle notes and the base notes. In fact, if you leftovers, when you eat it the next day, that's when you taste the base notes far better. That's why stuff tastes better the next day.
Oh.
Most Indian curries taste better the next day. Because you get the base notes and the middle notes a little bit later.
So good, so good. I mean, you touched upon MSG, and I think there's a lot of conversations around MSG. What are your thoughts on MSG? I think I know where you're going, but after what you shared at the beginning, but just
the original fear of MSG comes out of some classic American racism against Chinese people in the 1960s.
Oh.
Based on an article, it's not a scientific study at all, right? Saying that eating MSG gave some person a headache, and so they felt that MSG is the cause for that, right? They called it Chinese food syndrome and all of that, right? And it's actually, there is no such connection. Okay. In small amounts, as I said, it triggers your umami taste buds because that's what glutamates do. Okay? And my favorite way of convincing people about this is to ask them, they go to an Italian restaurant, the waiter will say, would you like me to shave some Parmesan cheese at the end, right? And would you say yes or no? And we say, yeah, I love that. Right? That adds a lot of flavor. They said, why do you think it adds a lot of flavor? Then it's MSG. So the way I call it is Parmesan cheese is white people MSG. So it's acceptable. Right? MSG is Chinese, so it's not acceptable. So fermentation of anything produces glutamates because it breaks down proteins, and glutamic acid is an amino acid. And when you have free glutamates, it's going to trigger your, that's why cheese, and particularly aged cheese like Parmesan, has lots of MSG. And by the way, they add salt, so sodium is there. So sodium glutamates, so it's literally MSG, right, in natural form. The other thing that naturally has lots of glutamates is tomatoes.
Oh.
Why do you think they're so widely used as a base? Because they add that umami flavor. In India, tomato is often the base for most vegetarian gravies because meat gravies, they come with the glutamates that are naturally there in meat. But vegetarians, they get it from tomato.
Oh.
Right? So again, if you take tomatoes, slice them, you eat them, they're fine. But if you sprinkle a little bit of salt on them and then you eat them, they're just so much more delicious. Because the sodium glutamate, you're literally making MSG. Right? Yeah. So I think this comes out of this fear that somehow Parmesan and tomatoes are natural sources of MSG, so they're okay. But this is a synthetic source, it's not okay. No, by the way, it's typically made from seaweed.
I see.
So Ajinomoto, the company that originally made this, isolated MSG from seaweed. Seaweed naturally have, Japanese cook with seaweed, and that's what makes those ramen broths, right? So those kombu, those sheets, that's basically just concentrated MSG, right? So in that sense, I think it is like anything, like for example, you can't eat more than a certain amount of salt.
Yeah.
Beyond that. Same thing with MSG, right? Again, more than a certain amount, it's not good for you. But you need a very tiny amount to add a tremendous amount of flavor and that umami sensation.
Yeah.
And so I think it is, in those amounts, it's absolutely fine. And people forget that companies, they will say, because the public is afraid of MSG, they will say no MSG added.
Yeah.
But if you look at the label, it will say hydrolyzed vegetable protein. What do you think that is? Hydrolyzed yeast. Dead yeast. Just all MSG.
I see.
Right? Your Marmite, Vegemite, all those things, all that yeast products are all MSG.
Yeah.
Right? So I think they will find a way to get glutamates in somehow or the other. One more fun fact. Tomato powder. Dehydrated tomato.
Yeah.
That's a nice way of adding MSG without saying MSG.
Oh, I see.
Right? So I think people should be less afraid of that and rather than use it in small amounts to make their food more delicious.
Exactly. It's and well, that's what I thought you were going in that direction.
It's the behavior that matters, right? I mean,
exactly.
I'm willing to appreciate the fact that some people might say, look, if you have a behavior where I say, don't eat anything that comes out of a packet or don't eat anything that has MSG, and if that rule you blindly follow somehow results in a lifestyle where you eat less of that, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? That I can accept. Like if I was if somebody was a nutrition coach or a health coach, and their way of making life simple for you is not to rely on your willpower and your conscious choice making, but make life simple for you. I'll give you some set of rules. Don't eat anything in this color, right? Don't eat anything that's white in color. Don't eat anything that comes out of a packet. I can see that it can be useful for a narrow set of situations where people are dealing with crippling amounts of obesity or very worse health conditions and they need to make some radical changes and they don't have the time to sit and think about the science and moderation and all of that. They don't have the willpower. They need some simple suggestions. I'm willing to accept that, maybe they're right? But when you then generalize it to everyone, then it creates a toxic relationship to food. The average healthy person should be able to go enjoy a snack from a biscuit or a fried rice once a while that has a little bit of MSG. None of that should matter.
Yeah, and I think that's what of course, the media has a big role playing there, where they get this news and they spread it and they associate with like cancer, then it becomes big. But what I like, you simplify things. I think the message that I'm coming from you is that these are so small quantities that you just, it's not a big impact unless you have a huge amount of consumption of that thing.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, this was a tangent here. We go back to our fascinating conversation about cooking. And I'm going to tell you, like, one of my favorite foods in India. Can you guess which one is it?
I'm trying to guess. Is it biryani?
Yes!
Usually an easy guess. Yes.
Wow. I mean, when I came to India, so I was living in India before for 4 years, and I used to travel a lot. And I was always so excited when I was going to Hyderabad and when I was going to Kolkata. It's fantastic. I love biryani.
Yes.
And also I read, also coming from you, that biryani is the most wide food consumed in India. What is it so special about biryani?
I mean, on a very practical note, it's biryani is basically rice and protein. Right? I mean, so it's a complete meal. And all the way from the poorest to the richest. For the poorest, you can make a biryani in the morning and you can serve people the whole day. Right? It's one shot. Right?
True.
And the flavor keeps improving over time because the spices and all of that settle down. Right? You add so many spices because it's a hot climate, you don't want the stuff to spoil. So that's what the spices do. Right? At the richer level, obviously, you can do very sophisticated. You can add more flavors, rose water, saffron, and so it keeps it. So it's one of those dishes where it's not an elite dish. It's not a poor person's dish. There is a version that exists for everyone. And depending on the spices you use and what protein you use, there is a variation in every part of India. Right? There's a variant of a biryani in Kerala that features pineapple, fish. Rice. The pineapple is actually a fantastic tenderizer as well, right? It has bromelain as one of those enzymes in pineapple, right? The reason when you bite a pineapple, you feel that burning sensation in your mouth is that there's a protein digesting enzyme the plant generates to protect itself. So it's so think of it as when you eat the pineapple is trying to eat you. Then it fails, right? So then you end up eating it. But there's so many variations, right? Different spices, different rice varieties. That's another thing across India, right? Small grain. You might have had the Kolkata biryani probably again, or the Hyderabad one with the basmati rice, right?
Yes.
But you should try the South Indian ones that use the samba rice, right? In Tamil Nadu and Kerala. It's a very tiny but super aromatic. And because it's tiny, the flavor density is higher because it packs more flavor in the same handful, right? And so it's just massively practical and that sense, right? And it also is it's a dish that is a mixture of influences of every community, every travel trade, right? I mean, it includes spices that originally came from Southeast Asia, like nutmeg and cloves and so on, right? Those originally are from Indonesia. It includes cooking techniques that kind of came from Central Asia with those people who came. Then the layering style that was uniquely sort of invented here, right? So the difference between, like for example, the Spanish paella, is the root of the word is similar to pulao, actually, right? And that is basically rice and some form of protein or any other thing, but sort of cooked in one shot rather than a multi-layered, multi-step cooking process. That's the technical difference between a biryani and a pulao, right? That technique is more of a Indian thing, so that gets you that smoky, more integrated sort of flavor, right? So I think most people it ends up becoming comfort food because carbs, right? I mean, our comfort and rice, nothing easier than eating rice, right? So it's what people order when they have absolutely nothing else they want, and then it becomes a thing that they just like, for my son, Friday is biryani night. And, we just order from some new biryani place or the other. And also, it's one of those things that's relatively high effort to try and make at home. It's a time-consuming thing, right? Multi-hours, right? So it's a special occasion thing you do at home, but on a day-to-day basis, you're going to order, right? So again, which is why it is the most ordered item in South and East India, right? So what we find is that in North and West India, the single most ordered category of item is pizza.
Pizza?
Yeah. Because again, people will order things they can't make at home.
Oh, yeah.
So in that sense, and that's a wheat eating part of the world.
Yeah.
And they will not order chapatis that they will make at home, but they will order pizza because it's harder to make. Right? So in the South and East, it's biryani, but nationally it's biryani if you total it all up. Yeah.
It's so good. Yeah. I used to travel to Hyderabad and pack a lot of biryani, bring home, and because I really love.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes. There's various types. I think there are some of the Tamil Nadu ones are spicier. They sometimes include tomato and chilies and so on. The ones in Kerala are more minimalist.
Yeah.
But really, I think Kozhikode has some of the best biryani I've actually had. Right.
Oh.
So,
yeah.
Calicut, yeah. And again, a city famously is where the Portuguese Vasco da Gama landed. Yes.
Very good. Okay, we're coming to the end. And I think, we unpacked a lot.
Yes.
But now people, what is maybe now simple advice when it comes to food to have a healthier lifestyle?
Yes.
What are your advice for people?
I'm generally someone who avoids giving any kind of universal advice, right? But as I said, I would just say that to start with, there's this traditional Indian concept it sort of comes from the Bhagavad Gita, but it's been sort of widely adopted, right? Of categorizing foods as into three, right? There's a Sattvic food, and there's Rajasic food, and there's Tamasic food.
Okay.
Now the original classification kind of has not aged very well, right? So the original classification is a very, very vegetarian sort of upper caste centric way of looking at it. So I think Sattvic food is vegetables and dals and milk and few other things that only the rich those would eat, and then it does not include onion and garlic because they're considered to be inferior, right, and so on. But they're actually some of the healthiest vegetables you can eat, right? Rajasic food is meat, certain kinds of meat, right? Because the people who are kings and warriors would often eat meat for protein, so that was considered Rajasic. And basically, all the things that cause your brain to become ignorant and so on is Tamasic. So the original classification is all other forms of meat, organ meats, and seafood. Actually, if you look at the original list of Tamasic foods, those are the healthiest things, by the way. But anyway, so this is the original. So a lot of people naturally, immediately know Sattvic, Rajasic, Tamasic, although they don't quite prescribe to the categorization. So I sort of, I think, much to the annoyance of all these traditionalists, I often say that it's good to maybe redefine Sattvic, Rajasic, and Tamasic, right? So in 2024, if you say you want a Sattvic lifestyle, which is be healthy and so on, right? All home cooked food is Sattvic.
Okay.
No matter what you do, including leftovers.
Okay.
Including what you put in the refrigerator, including stuff that's been cooked at your home with frozen vegetables. Not anything cooked at home, let's make it simple, is Sattvic, right? So as much as possible, Sattvic food is great.
Yeah.
People associate the word Sattvic with good anyway. So home cooked food is Sattvic any which way, leftovers, etc. Anything you eat at a restaurant is Rajasic because it's an indulgence.
Yeah.
It's 3 times more calories. It is much heavier. It is something that you have to be moderate about, right?
Yeah.
It could be, by the way, it includes you ordering food from a restaurant.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
as well, right? It's still a restaurant food. So that is Rajasic food. Treat that as a special sort of indulgence and so on. And finally, anything that comes out of a packet that's ultra processed, has no fiber, high amount of salt, desserts, all of that stuff is Tamasic. Things that you absolutely have to be careful about, meaning that you keep it to a minimum. Use it as a special occasion, right? A birthday cake, once in a while a packet of chips or going and eating a pizza somewhere, right? And so ultra processed food, stuff that comes out of a packet, that is Tamasic. Anything you eat, food cooked in a restaurant is Rajasic, and home cooked food is Sattvic. I feel that there's a more universal definition. You can apply it. So if you're a seafood eating South Indian, you can apply that, right? the thing is that for a North Indian, 2000 years ago, to have decided that seafood is tamasic is silly. Because seafood is some of the healthiest thing you can eat, right?
Oh, I see,
but it's a cultural thing that people, so I think it's good to redefine it this way. And it's very inclusive, right? It applies to every religion, applies to every community and, every caste in India. So I would encourage people eat Sattvic food, but, don't look up the traditional definitions because, you might not find the foods that you like, but redefine it this way.
So redefine Sattvic foods to food that you cook at home.
Oh, yeah.
Easy. I like how you keep things simple, and that's why also that I really admire you. Okay, we're coming to the end. And what is the one thing that you want people to remember from this conversation?
I think I want people to remember that your food choices are products of thousands of years of history and choices that your ancestors and great-grandfathers and great-great-grandmothers made, and do not therefore represent anything innately superior. They are accidents of history. What you eat is an accident of history. So therefore, don't put too much weight on that and focus on what food you're eating and whether it's the right balance and so on, right? So don't be burdened down by that. It's an accident of history, right? The second thing is that a disproportionate amount of health is not in your hands, it's genetic. So you did not choose all the millions of genetic intermixing that happened all that years ago, right? Today, for example, we now know that there are some autoimmune diseases that human beings get as a result of Homo sapiens interbreeding with Neanderthals in Europe like some 70,000 years ago. So we have some 2-3% Neanderthal genes. And if you have one specific ones, you're more likely to have some autoimmune. So let's recognize that a lot of things, your susceptibility to diabetes, at what age you might develop a cancer, etc., etc. Genetics plays a huge role and you don't really have any control over that. So you should use this not to be pessimistic, but instead focus more on the things that you can do without expecting magical results from one superfood, one super ingredient. If so much of your health is genetically determined, whether you're obese, whether you're this, etc., you have to be pragmatic about how you can, go about your life stress-free, right? So I think people have to appreciate that genetic luck, it plays a huge role, right? And you've got to sort of, look past that. And the last thing is that there are no superfoods or supervillains, right? There are only good diets over a sustained period of time. Nothing bad is going to happen because you had one pizza and French fries one day at an office party. You got to do that. You're not going to go to that place, be annoying and say, get me a salad or get me something else. You're going to enjoy, right? And so on. That one choice is not actually going to harm you, right? But over a monthly period, if you had pizza like 15 times, or you ordered biryani like 20 times from from your cloud kitchen and so on, that is what you have to look at rather than individual dishes, individual ingredients, whether it had MSG, whether it was made with organic or not. None of those things actually matter on aggregate when it comes to your bigger choices.
And also it removes a lot of pressure from ourselves. Also there's this concept of orthorexia, right? And I think the more we simplify things, and it's okay to have certain foods that maybe they are not great, but in small quantities. It is okay, but the most important is to see the long term and the diet that we have on a sustained way.
You cannot have that crippling paranoia that am I eating right?
Exactly.
You cannot have that. There's a famous, there's a very funny scene from a comedy series called Portlandia where they take this to extreme levels. This is two people with extreme orthorexia, right? Go to a restaurant and they order the chicken and they're like, is this chicken organic, right? Is this cage free, right? And what was the chicken fed, right? And then they're like, but is it local, and so on, right? And then eventually the restaurant then brings out a file with the name of the chicken, Colin, and says that this is what this chicken was fed, and this is when they had the flu shot, they were not given antibiotics, and so on. The full life, and and they said, I still want to go to the farm to see. So they said, just hold on to our table, and they drive, go to the farm. So it's a hilarious sort of abstraction of where people have gotten to now, right? Saying that you are micromanaging very trivial things.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. So people worried about hormones being injected. No, once you cook the meat, and once you eat it and digest it, it's all amino acids, fatty acids, and that's it, and sugars. It doesn't matter. None of the source organic, non-organic, none of that actually matters.
So good. I really, really loved our conversation. I really enjoyed the way you think, and I learned a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Great fun.
Wow, and that was so cool.